The whiskey was still running down the front of my shirt when my boss handed me a mop and said, "Nobody cares what you used to be. You're a waitress now." For a second, I just stood there. The whole restaurant had gone quiet. Not completely quiet. There was still the clink of silverware somewhere near the back. A country song playing softly through the ceiling speakers. The hiss of a steak hitting the grill in the kitchen. But the kind of quiet that happens when everybody sees something wrong and nobody knows what to do next. I looked down at my shirt. The whiskey had soaked through the fabric and left a dark stain across my chest. My knee was already throbbing. Now my pride was too. And somehow that hurt worse. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 44 years old. I spent 20 years in the Army before a training accident ended my career earlier than I ever imagined. These days, I worked nights at Dawson's Roadhouse just outside Columbus, Ohio, a few miles off Interstate 70. Not exactly where I pictured myself ending up. But life doesn't always ask for your opinion. Especially after injury. Especially after retirement. Especially after you've spent most of your adult life wearing a uniform, and suddenly nobody cares about your rank, your experience, or the fact that you used to manage supply operations worth millions of dollars. Now I carried trays. And on that particular Friday night, I was carrying a lot more than trays. The dinner rush had started around 6. By 7:30, every table was full. Families. Truck drivers. Retired couples. Local regulars. The usual crowd. I had already walked nearly 5 miles according to the step counter on my phone. Every step felt like somebody tapping a hammer against my right knee. I smiled anyway. You learn that in customer service. Actually, you learn it in the Army too. Keep moving. Handle the mission. Complain later. An older woman at table 12 noticed my limp. She tilted her head. "Honey, that knee bothering you again?" I laughed. "That obvious," she grinned. "Only to people who've had knees longer than patience." Her husband chuckled. I liked them. People like that made the job bearable. I poured their coffee. We talked about Ohio weather for a minute. Then the front door opened. And everything changed. The 2 men walked in like they owned the building. Expensive suits, expensive watches. The kind of confidence money buys when nobody has told you no for a long time. One was tall and silver-haired. The other was heavier, red-faced, already smelling like alcohol. Rick, my boss, practically sprinted toward them. "Mark, Victor, good to see you." That told me everything I needed to know. VIP customers. Great. Rick grabbed menus himself, something he never did for normal customers. The heavier guy, Victor, pointed toward a booth. "We'll take that one." The family sitting there looked startled. Rick smiled nervously. "I'll get them moved." I actually thought I had misheard him. But he did it. Made a family move tables. Just to keep these 2 happy. The little girl looked confused. Her father looked embarrassed. The businessmen didn't care. Not even a little. 10 minutes later, Rick assigned them to my section. Lucky me. I grabbed my notepad and walked over. "Evening, gentlemen." Victor looked at my leg. Then at my face. Then back at my leg. "What's with the limp?" Straight to it. No hello. No manners. Just straight to it. "It's an old injury. Sports. Army." That got their attention. Mark leaned back. "Military." "Yes, sir." Victor smirked. "Well, look at that." He lifted his whiskey glass. "From serving the country to serving ribeyes." They both laughed. I didn't. I wrote down their drink order. 2 top-shelf whiskeys, large pours. As I turned to leave, Victor called after me. "Don't forget to smile." I kept walking. The next hour got worse. Every time I stopped by the table, there was another comment. Another joke. Another little dig. Nothing obvious enough to get them thrown out. Just enough to remind me exactly what kind of men they were. Then came the moment that pushed everything over the edge. Victor pointed at his glass. "Have one with us." I blinked. "I'm working." "1 drink." "I can't." Mark smiled. "You Army people used to follow orders." Something inside me tightened. I kept my voice calm. "I'll bring your check whenever you're ready." I turned away. Then I heard Victor's chair scrape backward. Before I could react, cold liquid hit my chest. Whiskey. A full glass. The smell hit me immediately. The restaurant froze. I looked down. My shirt was soaked. Victor laughed. Actually laughed. Oops. Nobody said anything. Nobody moved. Then a chair scraped against the floor. A man stood up near the center of the dining room. Tom Reynolds. One of our regulars. Retired Army mechanic. Late 60s. Always wore a veteran cap. "That's enough," he said. Victor looked annoyed. "Sit down, old man." Tom didn't move. I said, "That's enough." For one brief second, I thought somebody was finally going to do the right thing. Then Rick arrived. Not to defend me. To defend them. Tom, please sit down. Tom stared at him. You're kidding. I'll handle it. You should have handled it already. Rick ignored him. Then he looked at me. Not Victor. Not Mark. Me. Sarah, clean this up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He poured whiskey on me. Rick shrugged. And they're paying customers. I stared at him. So what am I? His answer came instantly. Replaceable. The word hit harder than the whiskey. Then he grabbed a mop from a nearby closet and pushed it into my hands. The entire restaurant watched. Nobody spoke. Rick lowered his voice. Nobody cares what you used to be. You're a waitress now. I don't remember walking away. I just remember ending up behind the restaurant near the dumpster. Breathing hard. Trying not to cry. Trying not to throw something. Trying not to go back inside and lose the last bit of self-control I had left. A few minutes later, the back door opened. I heard footsteps. Tom. He stood beside me without saying anything for a moment. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. Cars rushed along Interstate 70 in the distance. Finally, he spoke. You were Major Mitchell, weren't you? I looked at him. Not anymore. Tom shook his head. Funny thing about rank. I said nothing. He looked toward the restaurant. Then back at me. Sometimes it disappears from paperwork long before it disappears from people. For the first time all night, somebody made me feel seen. Not pitied. Not managed. Seen. Then Tom reached into his pocket and handed me a folded napkin. A phone number was written on it. Call her tomorrow. Who is she? Someone who might want to hear about those two men. I looked down at the number, then back at him. What are you talking about? Tom's expression changed. Just slightly. Enough to make my stomach tighten. Let's just say those boys may have talked a little too much tonight. I stared at the napkin in my hand like it might explain itself. It didn't. Just a phone number written in blue ink, the numbers slightly shaky like Tom had scribbled it fast. Someone who might want to hear about those two men he'd said. That was all. Then he went back inside before I could ask another question. I stayed out by the dumpster another minute, breathing in cold Ohio air and old fryer grease, trying to decide if I was angry, embarrassed, or just tired. Maybe all three. When I finally walked back into Dawson's, nobody looked directly at me. That was almost worse than the whiskey. People suddenly found their mashed potatoes fascinating. Men checked their phones. A woman at table 6 gave me a sad little smile, the kind people give when they want to help but don't want trouble. Rick pointed toward the dining room. Table 9 needs refills. I looked at him. My shirt's soaked. He didn't even blink. Then finish your tables and change after close. There was a time in my life when I would have had 20 soldiers waiting for my decision. Drivers, warehouse clerks, supply sergeants, contractors. People who didn't always like me, but they listened because the job mattered. Now this man with a stained tie and a hairpiece that shifted when he got nervous was telling me to serve iced tea with whiskey drying on my skin. And I did it. That's the part people don't like to admit. Sometimes dignity doesn't look like a speech. Sometimes it looks like surviving the shift because rent is due Tuesday. I picked up the pitcher and went back out. Mark and Victor were still in their booth, laughing like nothing had happened. Victor raised his empty glass. There she is. I stopped at the edge of the table. Can I get you anything else? Mark smiled. You're very professional, I'll give you that. Victor leaned forward, his eyes red and mean. Bet she learned that in the army. Yes, sir. No, sir. Whatever you say, sir. I didn't answer. He tapped the table. Another round. I wrote it down. As I turned, Mark said something quieter. Make sure it's the good stuff. We've got a long drive to Dayton in the morning. Victor snorted. Not too early. Warehouse boys can wait. Mark shot him a look. Keep your voice down. Now I'd spent enough years around loud men in uniform and louder men in suits to know when a joke wasn't really a joke. I kept walking, but my ears stayed behind. At the service station, I poured water, not whiskey, just to buy myself a second. Their company name had been bothering me since Rick said hello. Halpern. Crane. I knew those names. Not personally. Not like friends. More like the way you remember a smell from a bad room you never wanted to enter again. When I came back, Mark was talking with his hands. Big gestures, big watch flashing under the lights. The state loves veterans, he said. You put a flag on the brochure, they stop reading the numbers. Victor chuckled. Careful. What Mark looked right at me. She's a waitress. She's not taking minutes. I set the drinks down. My fingers did not shake. I was proud of that. Anything else? Victor looked me up and down. You got a veteran's discount for yourself? Mark laughed too hard. I gave him the check. No, sir, but I can bring you a box for the food you barely touched. That shut him up for half a second. Not long, but enough. I walked away before my mouth got me fired faster than Rick was already considering. Near the register, Tom stood with his coat over one arm. He waited until Rick disappeared into the kitchen. Then he stepped closer. You okay? I almost laughed. Number. He nodded like that was the only honest answer. I'm sorry I didn't do more. You did more than most. Still didn't feel like enough. It never does. He glanced toward Mark and Victor's booth. You heard them talking. About Dayton and veterans contracts. I looked at him more carefully. What do you know? Not enough. But I sit on a small accountability committee through the VFW. Mostly boring stuff. Budgets, grant complaints. People asking why money meant for veterans keeps ending up in someone's cousin's consulting firm. That sounds about right. Tom pulled his cap lower on his forehead. I know a woman named Ellen Brooks, retired Government Accountability Office, sharp as a tack, mean as a wet cat when people waste public money. Despite myself, I smiled. That's the phone number. Yes. Why would she care what happened in a steakhouse? Because those men weren't just being ugly. His voice dropped. They were careless. I looked over his shoulder. Victor had his phone out now, showing Mark something on the screen. Both of them were grinning. Tom followed my eyes. You remember their company? I'm trying to. Halpern Crane Defense Solutions. There it was. The full name landed in my chest like a dropped toolbox. Halpern Crane? I had seen it before. Years ago? On delivery records, replacement parts, inventory disputes, the kind of paperwork nobody outside logistics ever wanted to read, which made it the perfect place to hide rot. I swallowed. What do they do now? Veterans support services, from what Ellen told our committee. Job placement, equipment grants, transportation programs. They've got contracts in 3 counties and they're trying for more. I looked back at the booth. Men like that loved veterans in speeches. They loved us in commercials. They loved us in black and white photos with flags behind us. But put one of us in front of them with a bad knee and an apron. Suddenly we were furniture. Rick came out of the kitchen and gave Tom a warning look. Tom didn't care. He tucked a $5 bill under his coffee cup, then said, "Call her. Or don't. Your choice." I don't even know what I'd say. Start with the truth. He buttoned his coat and walked toward the door. At the booth, Victor called out, "Hey, old man, you her bodyguard now?" Tom paused. He turned slow as Sunday. "No," he said, "just a witness." That wiped a little shine off Victor's face. Not much, but I saw it. 5 minutes later, Mark and Victor finally left. They did not apologize. Of course they didn't. Victor tossed 2 crumpled 20s on the table like he was feeding pigeons. Rick picked them up and smiled like he'd won something. After closing, I changed into the spare sweatshirt I kept in my car and drove home through the quiet streets of Columbus. It was after 1 in the morning. The city had that tired look it gets when all the hardworking people are asleep and all the lonely people are still awake. My apartment was on the 2nd floor of a brick building in Reynoldsburg. The stairs were murder on my knee, especially after a double shift. I climbed them one at a time. Inside, I kicked off my shoes, sat on the edge of the bed, and stayed there too long. The napkin was still in my pocket. I set it on the nightstand. Then I pulled an old plastic storage tub from the closet. Army Personnel was written on masking tape across the lid. I hadn't opened it in almost a year. Inside were coins, photos, old orders, a folded uniform jacket, and the kind of memories that don't ask permission before they hurt you. Near the bottom was a brown folder from 2018. I knew what it was before I opened it. A support memo, supply discrepancies, missing confirmations, inflated replacement parts. And there, printed halfway down the page, was the name I had been trying to place all night. Halpern Crane Defense Solutions. I sat back on the floor. My knees screamed. My hands went cold. Those men hadn't just humiliated me. They had dragged an old thread right back into my hands. And this time I wasn't sure I could let go. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I took 2 ibuprofen, put a heating pad under my knee, and turned on the little fan beside my bed because I'd always slept better with noise. Nothing worked. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Victor's hand tipping that glass, then Rick's face. Not angry, not ashamed. Annoyed, like I had inconvenienced him by being humiliated in the middle of his restaurant. Around 3:30 in the morning, I gave up pretending. I made coffee in the dark and sat at my kitchen table with the 2018 folder spread open in front of me. The pages smelled like dust and old cardboard. Most people would have seen boring paperwork. Item codes, delivery dates, invoice references, warehouse stamps. To me, it was a language I used to speak every day. And once I started reading, pieces came back. Back then, I was stationed at Fort Moore, Georgia. It was still called Fort Benning by most of us because old habits die slower than official name changes. I was a logistics officer, not a detective. I tracked what came in, what went out, what got lost, what got broken, and what somebody tried to claim had magically vanished. In 2018, I got pulled into a review because 3 units had reported delays on the same categories of equipment. Basic field support items. Nothing glamorous. Not tanks. Not helicopters. Just the stuff people don't think about until it isn't there. Protective cases, replacement components, vehicle support parts, medical transport gear. The invoices looked clean at first. That was the problem. Too clean. Same vendor. Same rounded numbers. Same delivery windows. Same missing signatures. And sitting right there in the middle of it was Halpern Crane Defense Solutions. I remembered bringing it up. I remembered the room. Bad coffee. Flickering light. A captain clicking his pen like he wanted me to stop talking before I even started. I remembered saying, "Sir, these delivery confirmations don't match the receiving logs." And I remembered the answer. "Major, stay in your lane." I had said, "Sir, supply is my lane." He didn't like that. A week later, the review got folded into something bigger. Then it disappeared. Or maybe I let it disappear. That was the thought I couldn't shake. Maybe I had been tired. Maybe I had accepted the brush off because I had 1,000 other problems on my desk. Maybe I told myself somebody higher up would handle it. That's the lie that keeps bad things alive. Somebody else will handle it. At 7 in the morning, I called the number Tom had given me. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. "Brooks." "No, hello." "Just Brooks." "Is this Ellen Brooks?" "Depends who's asking." "My name is Sarah Mitchell. Tom Reynolds gave me your number." A pause. Then the waitress. That stung more than it should have. "Former Army logistics officer," I said. Another pause. This one felt different. "Tom said you had a rough night." That's one way to put it. He also said you heard 2 Halpern Crane executives talking. I did. "Can you prove that?" I looked at the folder. "Not yet." "Then be careful how much you say." I almost hung up. Not because she was rude, because she was right. So I took a breath and told her the simple version. The restaurant. The whiskey. The comments. The Dayton warehouse. The line about flags on brochures. The old memo. Ellen didn't interrupt, not once. When I finished, she said, "Do you still have that memo?" "Yes." "Do not send it to me from a work email. Do not photograph it and text it around. Do not post anything online." I wasn't planning to. Good. People get emotional and turn useful evidence into gossip. I'm not people. "No," she said. "You're angry people, that's more dangerous." I almost smiled. I didn't like her yet, but I respected her. She asked me to read the document title, the date, the report number, and the names listed in the distribution section. When I read Halpern Crane out loud, she exhaled through her nose. Not surprise. Recognition. "You know them," I said. "I know of them." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I can give you right now." I rubbed my forehead. "Ms. Brooks, last night one of them poured whiskey on me in front of half a restaurant while my boss handed me a mop. So I'm not exactly in the mood for government mystery." Her voice softened just a little. "I understand." "No, you don't." "You're right, I don't. But I do understand men who build public reputations out of veteran sympathy while treating actual veterans like trash." That quieted me. Ellen said Halpern Crane had been connected to several complaints involving veteran services grants and support contracts. Nothing solid enough to move fast. Nothing clean enough to bring down. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, nothing driven by pride." I laughed once. "That last one may be a problem. At least you're honest." She told me to write down everything I remembered from the night before while it was fresh. Times. Names. Exact words if possible. Who was present. She also told me if Mark and Victor came back to the restaurant, I could document what happened in public areas, but not to bait them, threaten them, or play hero. "This is not revenge," she said. "It feels like revenge. Then get that out of your system before you touch evidence." I hated that sentence. Mostly because I needed to hear it. For the next few days, I worked my shifts like normal. Or tried to. Rick acted like nothing had happened. He scheduled me for the dinner rush again because, in his words, "You're good with difficult tables." That was one way to describe abuse. Tom came in twice. He didn't hover. He didn't make a scene. He ordered coffee, left decent tips, and gave me that old soldier nod that meant still standing good. The following Thursday, Mark and Victor came back. My stomach dropped when I saw them. Rick lit up like somebody had plugged him into the wall. "Gentlemen?" Victor spotted me and grinned. Well, look who's still limping around. My hand tightened around the menus. For half a second, I wanted to throw them in his face. Instead, I smiled. Not a warm smile. A customer service smile. The kind that shows teeth and nothing else. Booth or table? Mark watched me closely. Booth. I seated them. This time, my phone was in my apron pocket with the recorder running, just like Ellen had explained. Ohio allowed one-party consent, but Ellen's warning still echoed in my head. Keep it clean, keep it public, don't get cute. Most of what they said was useless. Steaks. Golf. A joke about Rick's cheap bourbon. Then Victor got loose. He always did after the second drink. "The Dayton guys called," he said. Mark lowered his voice. "Not here." Victor waved him off. "Relax. Same box's new contract. Nobody checks old inventory if you relabel it right." My pulse kicked. I kept filling water glasses at the next table, my face blank. Mark hissed, "Shut up." Victor laughed. "What, you afraid of the waitress?" I walked past them slowly. Not too slowly. Just enough. Victor raised his glass toward me. "No hard feelings, Army girl." I looked at him. There were feelings. Mark snorted despite himself. Victor didn't like that, but he also didn't say anything else useful. After they left, I went to my car and sent the audio file to Ellen through the secure link she had given me. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. "Sarah," she said, and her voice was different now. Sharper. "Listen carefully." "I'm listening. Do not confront them again." I wasn't planning to. "And do not tell your boss anything." I looked through the windshield at the Dawson's Roadhouse sign glowing red against the dark. Why? Because if this means what I think it means, those men aren't just cheating paperwork. Her next words made my mouth go dry. They may be stealing twice from the same veterans they're paid to help. For about 2 weeks, nothing happened. At least nothing obvious. No federal agents. No dramatic phone calls. No news reports. Just life. And life has a way of grinding you down while you're waiting for justice to catch up. I kept working at Dawson's Roadhouse. I kept serving customers. I kept smiling when my knee felt like somebody had filled it with broken glass. And every night I went home wondering if I had just wasted my time digging up a 6-year-old problem nobody wanted to solve. Ellen called occasionally. Always brief. Always careful. Never promising anything. We're checking records. We're comparing invoices. We're looking at contract histories. That was about it. No excitement. No breakthroughs. Just paperwork. Lots and lots of paperwork. Honestly, that part felt familiar. People imagine corruption investigations like television. They're not. Most of the time they're spreadsheets and coffee. One Thursday afternoon I was carrying a tray of iced teas when Rick snapped his fingers at me. "Office now." My stomach tightened. Nobody likes hearing that from a boss, especially when the boss already doesn't like you very much. I set the tray down and followed him. The office behind the kitchen smelled like stale coffee and old receipts. Rick closed the door. Didn't offer me a chair. Never a good sign. He folded his arms. "We need to talk." That usually means something bad. For you, maybe. I almost laughed. Instead, I waited. Rick looked uncomfortable. Not guilty. Just uncomfortable. Like a man about to do something ugly but hoping not to get blamed for it. Mark and Victor have concerns. There it was. Of course. I leaned against the wall. "What kind of concerns?" "They feel you've been hostile." I blinked. "Hostile." "You've made them uncomfortable." I stared at him. Actually stared. For several seconds. Then I started laughing, not because it was funny, because it was insane. "They poured whiskey on me." Rick shrugged. "And now they don't want you serving their table." "They don't even come here every day." "Doesn't matter." "Rick." "No, Sarah, listen." His voice hardened. "You've become bad for business." The room suddenly felt smaller. I looked at the filing cabinet, the old calendar, the stack of invoices, anything except his face, because I already knew where this conversation was going. "Bad for business means what?" Rick sighed. "Rich customers don't like seeing your face." The words landed harder than I expected. Maybe because they sounded rehearsed. Maybe because they were true. Maybe because somewhere deep down I'd known exactly what he thought of me for a long time. I nodded slowly. "Funny." Rick frowned. "What? Poor customers never seem to have that problem." His jaw tightened. "Clean out your locker." There it was. Just like that. Gone. 20 years in the Army. Years rebuilding my life afterward. And now I was being fired because two wealthy men didn't enjoy being looked at by someone they'd humiliated. I should have felt shocked. Instead, I felt tired. Deep down tired. The kind that settles into your bones. I grabbed my apron, my water bottle, the extra knee brace I kept in my locker. Nobody stopped me as I walked out. Nobody knew what to say. Outside rain had started falling. Cold March rain. The worst kind. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes before turning the key. The windshield wipers squeaked. My knee hurt. My head hurt. Everything hurt. The next few weeks weren't heroic. That's the truth. People like revenge stories because they imagine a straight line. Bad thing happens, hero fights back. Villain loses. Real life doesn't work like that. Real life gets messy. I missed a physical therapy appointment because I couldn't afford the copay. My landlord left a warning notice about late rent. The check engine light came on in my Toyota Camry. I ignored it because I couldn't afford not to. One afternoon, I stood in a grocery store comparing soup prices like I was solving a military logistics problem. Because sometimes survival looks embarrassingly small. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the feeling. The feeling that I'd spent years trying to rebuild after losing the army and somehow ended up right back at the beginning. One night, my daughter Emily called from Cincinnati. She was 20 years old and attending community college. Smart kid. Too smart, honestly. She could hear something was wrong immediately. Mom, I'm fine. You're lying. I smiled despite myself. How do you always know? Because you've used the same fake happy voice since I was 12. Fair point. I told her what happened. Most of it. Not all of it. When I finished, there was silence. Then she said softly, "Maybe this isn't your fight anymore." I closed my eyes. The apartment was dark except for the television glow. I know. So let it go. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. You don't understand. Then explain it. I took a breath. When I was in the army, people depended on those contracts. Emily stayed quiet. I continued. Equipment, transportation, support services, real people, real veterans. Mom, if somebody's stealing from them, then they're stealing from people who already paid enough. My voice cracked a little. Not from anger. From exhaustion. Emily sighed. I just don't want you getting hurt again. Neither did I. That was the problem. I was starting to realize there are some things that hurt whether you fight or not. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the old 2018 folder. Hours passed. I don't even know how many. At some point, I carried the folder to the sink, turned on the faucet, held the papers over the basin. Part of me wanted it gone. All of it. The records, the memories, the responsibility. I was tired of carrying proof nobody wanted. Tired of old battles. Tired of waking up heavier, slower, and angrier than I used to be. Then my doorbell rang. I nearly ignored it. Instead, I opened the door. Tom stood there holding 2 grocery bags. I stared. What are you doing? He lifted one bag. Chicken noodle soup. Tom. And crackers. I laughed despite myself. I don't need charity. Good. He handed me the bags. Because this is soup. We sat at my tiny kitchen table for almost an hour. No speeches, no grand advice. Just conversation. Army stories. Bad knees, bad backs. Growing older. The strange feeling of becoming invisible after spending your whole life mattering to somebody. When he finally left, I felt lighter. Not fixed. Just less alone. The next morning, Ellen called. I answered immediately. You sound terrible, she said. Thanks. I mean it. I got fired. Silence. Then, I'm sorry. The words surprised me. She actually sounded sincere. After a moment, she continued. We've made progress. I sat up straighter. What kind of progress? The kind that matters. My pulse quickened. Ellen's voice became serious. I've been tracking Halpern Crane for 14 months. I froze. What? We suspected contract fraud. We just couldn't connect older supply irregularities to newer veteran service contracts. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Then she said something that changed everything. Sarah, we don't need a hero. I frowned. Okay. We need someone who understands what the paperwork actually means. I looked at the old folder on the table. The same folder I'd nearly destroyed. And for the first time since losing my job, I felt something besides anger. Purpose. Then Ellen added, You were right in 2018. I closed my eyes. Years of frustration hit me all at once. They buried it. Yes, a pause. Then, they don't get to bury it twice. The investigation lasted almost 4 months. Not 4 weeks. Not 4 dramatic days. 4 long, frustrating months. Months of records, invoices, warehouse logs, contract amendments, delivery confirmations, conference calls that could have put an insomniac to sleep. I spent hours helping Ellen's team understand supply codes and procurement procedures most people would never notice. Sometimes I'd sit at my kitchen table until midnight explaining why 2 nearly identical inventory numbers actually meant 2 completely different things. Sometimes I'd spend an entire afternoon proving that equipment supposedly delivered to veterans programs had already been billed years earlier under separate contracts. It wasn't glamorous, but neither was the Army. Most important work isn't. The funny thing was, the deeper we dug, the less this became about me. At first I wanted accountability because of what happened in that restaurant. Then I started reading the reports. Veteran transportation grants, employment assistance programs, adaptive equipment funds, money meant for people trying to rebuild their lives. People like me. People like Tom. People like thousands of veterans nobody would ever interview on television. That's when the anger changed. It got quieter, sharper, more useful. One afternoon, Ellen called. "Are you free on May 14th? I looked at my calendar. Every day was free when you were unemployed. Depends. I need you in Columbus. Why? A brief pause. Then, because we're done collecting evidence. I sat up straight. Done. The word hit differently than I expected. Not exciting. Heavy. What happens now? Now people start answering questions. 3 weeks later, I found myself standing in front of a hotel ballroom downtown. The Columbus Grand Conference Center wasn't the kind of place I normally visited. Valet parking, glass chandeliers, polished marble floors, the kind of building designed to make people feel important. A veterans charity gala was being held that night. Several organizations were participating. Local media had been invited, state officials too. And right in the middle of it all sat one of the event's major sponsors, Halpern Crane Defense Solutions. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so disgusting. I adjusted the navy blue dress I'd borrowed from my sister. My knee was acting up. Badly. The cane helped, but I still hated using it. Some days it felt like carrying proof of everything I'd lost. Tom walked beside me toward the entrance. He looked uncomfortable in a suit. "How do I look?" he asked. "Like a mechanic pretending to be a senator." He laughed. "Good enough?" Then he looked at me. "You nervous?" "Terrified." "Good." I frowned. "Good. Means you're taking it seriously." "Fair enough." Inside the ballroom buzzed with conversation. Servers carried trays. Reporters adjusted cameras. Politicians shook hands. The smell of expensive food filled the air. I suddenly felt very aware of my weight, my limp, my cane, my age. For a moment I wondered whether I belonged there at all. Then I remembered something. Neither did Mark and Victor. That helped. The event started at 7. We found our table near the back. Ellen sat 2 tables away with several investigators and legal staff. She gave me a small nod. Nothing dramatic. Just acknowledgement. The program moved exactly the way these events always move. Introductions. Speeches. Awards. More speeches. A video montage featuring smiling veterans and patriotic music. Then came the sponsors. Mark Halpern took the stage first. Expensive suit. Perfect hair. Perfect smile. Victor sat nearby looking smug. The audience applauded. Mark began talking about service, sacrifice, community, the importance of supporting America's veterans. Listening to him felt like watching a man borrow somebody else's life story. "We owe our veterans everything," he said. The room applauded again. Tom muttered something under his breath. I couldn't repeat it in church. Victor eventually joined him on stage. Together they talked about commitment and integrity. The words sounded almost impressive, if you didn't know who was saying them. Then Victor spotted me. Even from across the ballroom I saw recognition flash across his face. He leaned toward the microphone, smirking. "Some people serve in uniform," he said. "Others find different ways to contribute." A few people chuckled politely. The comment wasn't obvious enough for most of the room, but I knew exactly who it was meant for. So did Tom. "Still can't help himself," he muttered. "Number. Men like Victor never could." Then the evening changed. The moderator introduced Ellen Brooks. Most people didn't know who she was, which was exactly why she was dangerous. People expect trouble to arrive loudly. Real trouble usually walks in carrying documents. Ellen stepped onto the stage, calm, professional, unimpressed. The room settled. She began speaking about accountability within veterans programs. Then she started showing numbers, charts, contract records, Payment histories. Nothing emotional. Just facts. The mood changed quickly. Several people stopped eating. Others stopped smiling. Mark looked annoyed. Victor looked confused. Ellen continued. The evidence indicates significant concerns involving inflated billing practices, duplicate inventory reporting, and misrepresented delivery records. The room became very quiet. Mark stood. This is outrageous. Nobody responded. Ellen clicked to the next slide. More documents. More dates. More numbers. Then she said the words I'd been waiting months to hear. Several contracts connected to Halpern Crane Defense Solutions are currently under formal review. A reporter immediately raised a phone. Another turned on a camera. Mark's confidence finally cracked. We came here to support veterans. Ellen looked directly at him. No, Mr. Halpern. Her voice remained perfectly calm. You came here to be photographed standing beside them. The silence afterward felt enormous. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. Ellen looked toward my table. Ms. Mitchell. Every eye in the room turned. My heart started pounding. I stood slowly, using the cane, not hiding it, not apologizing for it. Can you explain the significance of duplicate delivery codes within military supply records? For a second I felt 20 years younger, back in a briefing room, back doing work that mattered. I cleared my throat. Yes, ma'am. The room listened. It generally means someone charged twice for equipment that only moved once. Nobody laughed now. Nobody checked their phones. Victor suddenly stood up. His face was red, angry, desperate. She's a fired waitress with a grudge. There it was. The argument he'd been waiting to make. The room turned toward me again. I looked at him, really looked at him. Then I answered. I was a logistics officer before I was a waitress. Victor sneered. You're nothing. A few months earlier, that would have destroyed me. Not anymore. I smiled. Not a customer service smile. A real one. Small. Steady. You thought a title was the same thing as a person. The room stayed silent. Victor didn't have an answer. Neither did Mark. A few moments later, 2 federal officials approached their table. Nobody dragged them away. Nobody slapped handcuffs on anyone. Real life rarely works like television. But they were escorted from the ballroom. Publicly. Under dozens of watching eyes. And somehow that felt even better. As the crowd buzzed around us, I noticed another familiar face. Rick. Standing near the catering station. Pale. Frozen. He looked like a man watching his future collapse in real time. When the event ended, he approached me. Tom quietly stepped aside but stayed close, just in case. Rick swallowed. Sarah. I waited. I didn't know. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I'd heard that excuse my entire life. I didn't know. I didn't mean it. I was just doing my job. Rick looked miserable. Good. You knew enough. His shoulders sagged. I was running a business. I shook my head. No. He frowned. You were selling your spine by the hour. The words hit him. I could see it. For once he had nothing to say. I walked away before he could find any. Outside, the night air felt cool against my face. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because I had won. Because I no longer felt invisible. People think the ending is the best part. It isn't. The ending is usually just where the paperwork starts. The gala happened in May. By June, local news stations were still talking about Halpern Crane. By July, lawyers were involved. By August, investigators were still digging through records. Real accountability moves slower than people want. But it moves. And once it starts, it has a way of finding places nobody expected. A few weeks after the gala, I met Tom for breakfast at a diner in Reynoldsburg. Nothing fancy. Just coffee, eggs, and pancakes bigger than the plate. The kind of place where half the customers knew each other, and the waitress called everybody Hon. Tom was already there when I arrived. He looked up as I walked in with my cane. Morning, Major. I pointed at him. If you keep calling me that, people are going to think I'm important. Tom grinned. You are important. I rolled my eyes and sat down. The waitress poured coffee. Tom slid a newspaper across the table. The headline wasn't huge. No dramatic front-page scandal. Just a local story. State reviews multiple veteran service contracts. I stared at it for a moment. Tom took a sip of coffee. Looks like somebody's having a rough summer. I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. Not the polite customer service version I'd been using for years. That felt good. A lot of things were changing. Some fast. Some slowly. Halpern Crane started losing contracts. Several counties paused agreements while reviews continued. Organizations that once proudly displayed the company's logo quietly removed it from websites and brochures. Funny how quickly loyalty disappears when reporters start asking questions. Mark Halpern tried fighting back through public statements. Victor blamed political enemies. Both hired expensive attorneys. Neither looked nearly as confident as they had sitting in that booth at Dawson's Roadhouse. As for criminal charges, that process was still ongoing. I learned something during those months. Justice isn't a movie. Sometimes the most satisfying outcome isn't watching someone fall. It's knowing they can no longer hide. That mattered more than I expected. The bigger surprise was Rick. At first, he tried pretending nothing had happened. He told customers the media had exaggerated everything. He told employees he barely remembered the incident. Unfortunately for him, dozens of people remembered, including former staff. One waitress spoke up, then another, then a bartender. Stories started surfacing. Not criminal stories, just years of small humiliations, years of favoritism, years of treating workers like they were disposable. Business slowed. Not overnight, but steadily. People notice character eventually, even when it takes a while. By fall, rumors spread that Rick was trying to sell the restaurant. A few months later, he did. The first time I heard the news, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Not because I regretted anything, because anger is heavy, and carrying it for too long wears you out. One afternoon, Emily came home from Cincinnati for the weekend. We sat on my apartment balcony drinking iced tea. The trees were turning orange. Kids played basketball in the parking lot. Normal life. The kind of life I hadn't appreciated enough before everything happened. Emily watched me for a while. Then she asked, "Do you feel better?" I thought about it. A year earlier, I would have answered immediately. Now I wasn't so sure. "Different," I said. "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is." She laughed. "No, it's a mom answer." "Fair." I looked out toward the street. I thought winning would feel bigger. Emily nodded. "What does it feel like?" I took my time answering. "Like setting down a bag I've been carrying for years." She smiled. "That actually sounds pretty good." "It is." And it was. Not because all my problems disappeared. They didn't. My knee still hurt. Some mornings it hurt enough that getting out of bed felt like negotiating with an angry landlord. I still struggled with my weight. I still missed the army. I still occasionally woke up wondering who I would have become if that accident had never happened. Those things didn't magically vanish, but they no longer defined every day. That was the difference. Around that same time, something unexpected happened. 3 separate companies offered me consulting jobs. Compliance work, contract review, risk assessment. The pay was good, better than anything I'd earned since leaving the military. One offer was especially tempting. Then Ellen called. "Have you accepted anything yet?" "Not yet." "Good." I leaned back in my chair. "Why?" "I have a question." That usually meant trouble. "What kind of question?" "A few veterans organizations need help." I smiled. "That's not a question." "No, this is." I could hear amusement in her voice. "What would happen if you stopped helping companies protect themselves and started helping veterans rebuild their careers instead?" The idea stayed with me. For weeks. Then months. Until eventually I stopped thinking about it and started planning it. That's how Second Chapter Consulting was born. A tiny office. 2 desks. A coffee maker that sounded like a dying lawnmower. And a mission. Helping veterans and older workers transition into civilian careers. Nothing glamorous. No television interviews. No giant ribbon-cutting ceremonies, just real people trying to figure out what comes next. Turns out there were a lot of them. More than I realized. A 58-year-old truck driver whose medical issues ended his career. A Navy veteran struggling to write a resume after 26 years of service. A widow returning to the workforce after caring for her husband. People who felt overlooked. People who felt finished. People who needed someone to remind them they weren't. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, a young Army veteran named Carla walked into my office. Couldn't have been older than 28. She sat across from me, twisting her hands together. Nervous. Lost. I recognized the look immediately. I had worn it myself. Finally, she asked the question. The real question. Not about jobs. Not about résumé. About identity. I don't know who I am without the uniform. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the window. Cars passed outside. I remembered my own retirement. The silence afterward. The confusion. The grief nobody warns you about. Then I smiled. A genuine one. I know that feeling. She looked relieved. Does it go away? I thought carefully before answering. Not all at once. She nodded. Waiting. I continued. But one day you stop asking who you used to be. The room felt very quiet. And you start asking what you can build now. Carla smiled. A small smile. But it was enough. After she left, I sat alone in the office for a while, thinking. About the army. About Dawson's. About whiskey stains and bad bosses and men who confused wealth with worth. About Tom. About Ellen. About second chances. The truth is, those men never took my dignity. They couldn't. They embarrassed me. They hurt me. They underestimated me. But they never owned what they thought they owned. The army taught me how to serve. Life taught me who deserves it. And I've learned that the people who work hardest to take away someone else's dignity usually don't have much of their own. If you've ever been counted out, underestimated, or made to feel like your best years are behind you, I hope you remember something. Your story isn't over just because one chapter ended. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself.